On November 3, 2021, a hunter moving through the edge of Cuyahoga National Forest paused when he saw the faded glint of metal buried beneath fallen leaves. A Ford F-150 sat there, its paint corroded into dull streaks of brown and green, the tires rotted flat into the soil. The windows were clouded with condensation and time. Inside, slumped across the passenger seat, lay bones threaded with remnants of cloth. The driver's side held another body collapsed into the wheel, the shape distorted by years of decay. What began as a weekend hunt had ended in a hidden grave on wheels. The name tied to the truck was Ethan Keller. He had been 38 when he vanished, a factory worker from Akron. A man known for methodical routines and quiet presence. He had told family he was heading out for a short hunting trip in 2016. He never returned. Flyers had been printed, search parties combed the forest line, but the trail had stopped cold within days. Over the years, his case shifted into the drawer of unresolved disappearances, the kind that gather dust until a stray discovery brings them roaring back. Ethan's Ford was more than a missing vehicle. To investigators, it was an evidence vault sealed by nature. The interior smelled of mildew rust and the faint mineral tang of dried fluids. A hunting rifle leaned across the back seat, its barrel orange with corrosion. On the passenger side floor, a cracked thermos lay against the rubber mat. It was the same thermos volunteers had reported finding footprints beside years before an object logged and then lost in paperwork. Now it was here, tethered to the final scene. Ethan's life had never appeared destined for mystery. He had clocked into the plant at 6 a.m. 5 days a week for more than a decade. His co-workers remembered him for neat handwriting on shift logs, for punctuality, for the way he carried a worn leather wallet always tucked in his front pocket. The discovery of his truck, years later, fractured that steady image. This was no accident on a trail. 2 bodies inside meant something far darker, something hidden from his ordinary world. The ordinary that surrounded Ethan before he vanished was deceptively simple evenings in a modest split-level home, weekends spent cleaning his rifle, and Saturdays mowing the same patch of grass he had maintained for years. To the neighbors, nothing suggested he would one day disappear. Yet inside the house there had been arguments muffled behind closed doors, bills stacked on the counter, and a marriage that bore the strain of expectation. Those fractures ignored in daily routine would one day matter. On that cold November morning, detectives stood over the Ford and took in the scene. Mud clung to the wheel arches, vines crept through the undercarriage, and frost crusted the inside glass. The first officer on site radioed a short line that carried the weight of years. "We found him. We found Keller's truck." But there was no relief. The discovery held more questions than answers. That was the last place Ethan Keller was ever seen alive. This is the story of a man who walked into the woods and left behind a puzzle that would take years to open. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Ethan Keller's world before his disappearance appeared predictable, shaped by habit and outwardly stable. He lived in Akron, Ohio, on a cul-de-sac lined with nearly identical single-story houses built in the 1970s. His own house carried tan vinyl siding that weathered each season with minimal change, a chain-link fence enclosing a small yard, and a swing set in the back, whose metal joints had begun to rust orange where paint had flaked away. Neighbors often recalled Ethan as the one man who never failed to wave while pushing a mower, or who in winter shoveled his driveway and then quietly moved on to clear the walkway for an elderly couple across the street. The details were simple, but the impression was consistent, steady, courteous, unhurried. Inside his home, Ethan was a man of ritual. Each weekday began in the kitchen at 5 a.m. with the metallic click of the Mr. Coffee machine. He packed his children's lunches into brown paper bags, folded with sharp creases, each one marked with their initials in ballpoint pen. Evan's bag usually held a ham sandwich, an apple, and a granola bar. Claire's had turkey slices, a small yogurt, and crackers wrapped in plastic. After lining the bags on the counter, Ethan filled a dented silver thermos with coffee and slipped a wax paper-wrapped sandwich for himself into his backpack. By 5:30 a.m., he was out the door, the Ford truck, warming with its steady engine-note headlights, cutting through the quiet of the cul-de-sac. His job at the tire plant was not glamorous, but it was dependable. Ethan worked second-shift security occasionally, covering maintenance over time. Colleagues described him as reliable in ways that were almost invisible until you needed them. One co-worker later told investigators, "If you were sick or your kid had a game, you called Ethan. He never said no. He'd cover your hours, even if it meant working straight through." His supervisors noted the same. He was not the loudest man in the break room, nor the fastest to volunteer ideas at safety meetings, but he signed the overtime sheets without complaint and was never late. In a plant where turnover was constant, Ethan's record of attendance stood out as unusual. At home, his marriage carried more friction. Marissa, his wife of 12 years, worked as a dental assistant downtown. Where Ethan dressed plainly and saved receipts in a cigar box in the hall closet, Marissa favored new clothes and steady social outings. She was quick-sharp with her words, and according to friends, rarely patient with limitations. Her co-workers later told police that she often joked about marrying a paycheck instead of a man with ambition. In public settings, the jokes passed as banter, but inside the Keller household, they landed heavier. Ethan rarely countered them. He carried his routines as if they were armor, moving through each day with deliberate calm, as though consistency could substitute for confrontation. The children tethered him. 10-year-old Evan resembled his father, quiet and observant, while 7-year-old Claire had Marissa's restless spark. Ethan spent weekends with them at the nearby reservoir, teaching them how to cast fishing lines with steady patience. He showed Evan how to untangle hooks from weeds without breaking the line, and he held Claire's hand steady when she flinched at the wriggling of live bait. Sundays meant breakfast together, pancakes if he had time, cereal if he did not. The rhythms were small but repetitive, the sort of gestures that built a sense of ordinary family life. Beyond family and work, Ethan's strongest attachment was hunting. Each autumn he arranged vacation days around the season. He prepared meticulously. His gear was stored in labeled plastic bins in the garage, ammunition in one knives cleaned and oiled, in another maps folded and sealed in a transparent sleeve. He loaded his Ford pickup with coolers, blankets, a toolkit, and preserved food. Friends said he was not reckless, not the type to drink heavily by a campfire or wander without a compass. To Ethan, hunting was a controlled space. The woods gave him silence, not escape. In a life where bills stacked up and arguments simmered, the forest was one place where each step and each sound made sense. Neighbors saw the devotion and quietly noted its weight. "He never wanted more," one man said later. He thought if he just kept his head down, life would stay steady. For his circle, Ethan's dedication to family was admirable but puzzling. They wondered why he did not push harder for a promotion, why he did not look for a higher-paying job when layoffs thinned the plant workforce. Marissa asked the same questions more directly. Arguments broke out when utilities ran late, when she suggested moving into a larger house, when she hinted about vacations beyond Ohio. Ethan would listen, nod, sometimes respond with silence that itself felt like resistance. He avoided shouting matches, preferring the quiet defense of inaction. Financial strain sharpened those tensions. Records later revealed credit cards creeping upward, balances carried month to month. Ethan remained cautious, preferring to pay in cash and tuck away modest savings in a local credit union. Marissa pressed for more, and when her friends posted photos of trips or new cars online, her dissatisfaction grew sharper. In the evenings, when Ethan sat in front of the TV with Evan's homework spread on the table, Marissa scrolled on her phone, showing him listings for houses they could not afford. His reply was often the same, a shake of the head, a reminder about debt, a suggestion that patience mattered. Despite the strain, outward appearances remained intact. On holidays, the Keller family posed for photographs in matching sweaters. At barbecues, neighbors remembered Ethan tending the grill quietly, while Marissa circulated among guests. The contrast between them, his steadiness and her restlessness, was visible but not unusual. Couples argued. Couples adjusted. Nothing about their lives suggested the fracture that would soon widen. By the fall of 2016, Ethan's world looked unbreakable. His children were in school, his factory job was secure, and hunting season gave him purpose. The Ford truck sat in the driveway, its bed covered with a tarp, ready for another trip. The house on the cul-de-sac gave no hint of disaster. Neighbors waved, the children played, and the cycle repeated. There were no sirens, no disruptions, only the quiet accumulation of small pressures. Weeks later, Ethan would drive that same truck into the woods. He would not return. And what looked like ordinary steadiness would be reclassified in files and interviews as the last chapter of a life about to vanish. The surface appeared calm. Beneath it, pressure was building. The first cracks in Ethan Keller's life did not appear suddenly. They emerged slowly in patterns small enough to dismiss, yet steady enough to leave a mark. Investigators later mapped those cracks through statements, receipts, and fragments of testimony, finding a quiet accumulation of stress that reshaped the family before his disappearance. At the tire plant, over time, hours that once seemed optional became necessary. Ethan signed extra shifts, not to get ahead, but to keep pace. Records from 2015 and 2016 showed utility bills paid late, balances rolled over on credit cards, and withdrawals from the family savings account that chipped away at what little cushion they had built. A colleague remembered him leaning against the vending machine during a night break, saying only, "It never stops before drinking coffee and heading back to his post." The words were vague, but the tone was weary. At home, Marissa's impatience grew more visible. Friends recalled her jokes turning sharper. "He's married to that plant more than to me," she said at a dinner in late 2015, laughter masking a complaint that landed too heavily to be ignored. Ethan rarely responded. He maintained his routines, shuffling pay stubs into the cigar box in the hall closet, mowing the lawn, and preparing the children's lunches. To outsiders, his silence seemed like stoicism. To Marissa, it read as absence. The couple's arguments escalated around money. Bank subpoenas later confirmed that Marissa had opened 2 department store credit lines without telling Ethan. When statements arrived in the mail, Ethan confronted her quietly, pointing to the balances in ballpoint pen. Witnesses recalled his method. He did not shout. He underlined. The silence after those conversations stretched for days, broken only by the sound of children in the house or the slam of doors when Marissa left for errands. Neighbors began to notice changes. Ethan, once steady with greetings, grew reserved. He still waved while mowing, but his eyes lingered less. He no longer joined in neighborhood cookouts, citing fatigue from shifts. Marissa, by contrast, attended more social gatherings without him dressed sharply, phone in hand, her voice bright while she spoke about frustrations. "He just doesn't want more," she confided to one neighbor, "and I can't live like this forever." The fractures widened around hunting season. Ethan treated the trips as ritual, a way to reset. But for Marissa, They became proof of distance. In one argument later described by a family friend, she accused him of hiding in the woods rather than fixing their life. Ethan did not argue back. He loaded his gear into the truck, checked his maps, and drove north for 3 days. When he returned, she barely spoke to him except to ask how much gas money he had spent. For investigators, these tensions marked the early indicators of motive and fracture. They were not explosive fights with police reports or emergency calls. They were the quiet variety, the kind that neighbors overheard through walls, that friends dismissed as ordinary marriage strain, but that accumulated until they carried weight. There were also shadows beyond finances. Phone records later suggested late-night texts from Marissa to numbers Ethan did not recognize. Investigators traced one to a co-worker from the dental office, another to a contact saved only as RC. Nothing explicitly incriminating appeared in the logs, but the frequency dozens of messages clustered around midnight hinted at more than casual conversation. Ethan noticed. A co-worker remembered him one night staring at his phone thumb, hovering above the screen, then sliding it into his pocket without a word. Small objects around the house became symbols of distance. Marissa's new handbag bought on credit, Ethan's dented thermos carried to work, the unopened stack of bills on the counter. Each item marked the widening gap. Even the hunting gear in the garage, carefully organized, became a point of contention. Marissa once referred to it as his second home, a phrase she repeated more than once. By mid-2016, the cracks were visible to nearly everyone close. Ethan's sister recalled him saying during a family barbecue, "I just keep moving forward. I don't know what else to do." She thought little of it, then, assuming it was about work. Only later, reading reports, did she see the weight behind the words. The fractures did not explode in a single argument. They spread like hairline cracks in glass, barely visible, but once pressure applied, inevitable. And when Ethan left for his final hunting trip, those fractures had already carved deep lines through the life he thought was steady. The evidence of collapse was already there, only no one had named it yet. The incident that altered the Keller family's trajectory began on November 12, 2017. A Sunday morning in rural Ohio, the air sharp with the season's first frost. Ethan Keller, 42 years old, carried his rifle case across the driveway of his modest ranch-style home, loading the final piece of gear into his Ford F-150. The truck's odometer already showed nearly 190,000 miles, but Ethan trusted it the way some men trusted old tools. At 6:45 a.m. neighbors saw him secure the tailgate, pat his jacket pocket for his keys, and wave toward the house where his children pressed faces to the window. Marissa remained inside her arms, crossed, visible only briefly through the curtain. The moment seemed routine, a man departing for another hunting trip. Yet investigators would later frame this departure as the last verified sighting of Ethan alive. He drove north toward Wayne National Forest, a span of dense woodland cut by narrow logging roads and seasonal campsites. The area was known to hunters for its deer population and to deputies for its remoteness. Cell coverage faded within miles, leaving only faint signals near ridgelines. Ethan carried his license maps folded into a weathered Ziploc bag and a thermos filled before dawn. At 9:12 a.m., a highway camera on Route 33 captured his truck crossing an overpass. The timestamp became a cornerstone of the case file. Past that point, records fell silent. Ethan's phone ceased activity at 9:47 a.m., registering its last ping near a ranger station. His credit card showed no further transactions. When Ethan failed to return by evening, Marissa called his sister, then local authorities. At 10:30 p.m., the Perry County Sheriff's Office logged a missing person report. Deputies noted the strained tone of Marissa's statement. She said he had left for another one of his escapes and that she had no idea where in the forest he had gone. Her emphasis on escape rather than hunting drew attention, but not enough to shift immediate focus from a standard search. By dawn, deputies, volunteers, and a search and rescue unit began combing trails. They located tire tracks consistent with Ethan's truck near an access road, but the ground had hardened from overnight frost obscuring patterns. Dogs, deployed along ridgelines, picked up faint scent trails that dissipated within hours. Helicopters circled, scanning for the truck's metallic reflection among trees. Nothing surfaced. For 3 days, search teams extended grids outward. Ethan's friends joined, citing his experience outdoors and calm under pressure. He wouldn't get lost, one insisted during interviews. He knew those woods, yet no tent, no campfire, no discarded wrapper appeared. The forest remained indifferent. Marissa's behavior during these days was noted by volunteers. While she attended command briefings, she rarely joined field searches. She smoked in the parking lot, speaking often on her phone, and once remarked within earshot, "Maybe he doesn't want to be found." The words unsettled those nearby, though at the time they were dismissed as stress. On November 18th, the search was scaled back. Officially, weather and dwindling leads forced the decision. Unofficially, deputies admitted frustration, no scent trail, no physical evidence, no truck. The forest had swallowed Ethan Keller whole. The incident, written in the sheriff's report as voluntary disappearance or accident pending further evidence, left the family suspended. For Marissa, it marked the first evening she slept in the bed alone. For his children, it marked the unanswered question that echoed through holidays and school events. And for investigators, it marked the opening of a file that would sit unresolved for years until a discovery reignited every fracture of that November morning. What appeared at first to be a hunting trip gone wrong was, in hindsight, the opening act of something far darker. On November 20th, 2017, the Perry County Sheriff's Office formally transitioned Ethan Keller's file from active search to missing person investigation. The search command post dismantled, volunteers dispersed, and media crews that had briefly crowded the rural roads shifted their focus elsewhere. Yet inside the sheriff's office, Detective Harold Drummond opened a binder labeled *Keller, Ethan James *. Its first entry, *, last seen November 12th, 2017, Wayne National Forest. Status unlocated. Detectives began their routine sequence. Phone records. First, Ethan's cell pinged at 9:47 a.m. near the ranger station tower. After that, silence. Call logs showed several short conversations the prior evening, including a 3-minute call with his sister Elaine at 8:15 p.m. on November 11th. Elaine reported nothing unusual. Ethan simply said he was heading out early. Text history contained no alerts, only a generic message to Marissa reading *, back by nightfall, don't wait up, *. The next layer, financial data. Ethan's debit card registered a $28 fuel purchase at 6:22 a.m. in New Lexington. Receipts confirmed. No further charges after that point. Bank accounts showed no large withdrawals, no transfers, no anomalies. Insurance policies were modest. Life insurance valued ATI $75,000, enough to cover mortgage obligations. Investigators noted the detail but flagged it as standard. Detective Drummond interviewed Marissa on November 21st inside their living room. Transcripts later highlighted her composure, described by officers as controlled, measured. When asked about Ethan's habits, she replied, "He went off whenever he wanted. I stopped keeping track." Asked whether he packed overnight supplies, she admitted she hadn't checked. The only item she mentioned specifically was the thermos he always carried. Neighbors painted a more nuanced picture. One reported overhearing arguments weeks earlier about money. Another recalled Ethan leaving the house abruptly after what sounded like shouting. A co-worker at his contracting job stated Ethan had recently expressed fatigue, describing his home as more hostile than the job site. These testimonies didn't prove foul play, but they began to tilt suspicion away from a simple hunting accident. On November 23rd, deputies conducted a secondary canvass of Wayne National Forest. Game wardens confirmed that no campsites bore Ethan's name, and no hunting tags linked to his license had been registered. Tire impressions near Access Road, 14 initially thought to match his truck, were re-examined by state troopers. Measurements suggested a heavier tread than Ethan's Ford carried. Forensic photographs were inconclusive, blurred by frost melt. Family dynamics entered focus. Interviews revealed Marissa had confided frustrations to a friend weeks before the disappearance, describing Ethan as checked out and dead weight. Elaine, Ethan's sister, told detectives her brother had once hinted at trouble at home, but offered no detail. These fragments accumulated into a narrative: a man potentially under stress, a marriage fraying, and a sudden disappearance, lacking natural explanation. Detective Drummond ordered a record sweep. Vehicle registration confirmed the Ford F-150 remained outstanding, its VIN flagged nationwide. Pawn shops were queried for Ethan's rifle with negative results. Credit bureaus showed no new accounts. Employment records indicated no attempt to resign or collect final pay. His absence generated no financial footprint, as though he had vanished mid-breath. Thanksgiving passed with no answers. On November 27th, the sheriff's office issued a bulletin requesting public assistance. Flyers circulated across Perry and Fairfield counties, Ethan's face reproduced in grainy grayscale, dark hair, trimmed beard, 5'10", last seen in camouflage jacket. The line beneath read, "****. If seen, do not assume voluntary absence. Contact authorities immediately. ***. By December, tips dwindled. One hunter claimed to spot a truck deep in the forest but could not provide coordinates. Another insisted he heard gunshots on the morning of November 12th, though such sounds were common during hunting season. Each lead collapsed under scrutiny. The file grew thicker with paper, yet thinner with hope. Ethan Keller's disappearance moved quietly from the urgency of an emergency to the cold persistence of an unresolved case. For detectives, suspicion lingered without evidence. For Marissa, daily routines resumed with unnerving speed, and for his children the silence stretched unanswered. The official investigation had begun, but it was only a frame around a picture that remained invisible. By January 2018, the case of Ethan Keller had shifted from a missing hunter to a file marked ***, Special Inquiry ***. The sheriff's office formally requested assistance from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Their arrival brought lab technicians and digital analysts, men and women who approached the file not as a tragedy in the woods, but as a puzzle to be solved piece by piece. The first priority was the evidence box retrieved during the initial search. Inside were Ethan's thermos, his orange knit cap, and a cigarette lighter found 50 yards from the access road. Each item underwent forensic processing at the state lab in London, Ohio. Swabs were taken for trace DNA fingerprints lifted from metal surfaces, fibers collected from cloth. The thermos produced partial prints belonging to Ethan, consistent with ordinary use and no foreign DNA. The cap carried strands of his hair, nothing unusual. The lighter, however, tested negative for Ethan's prints entirely. Analysts suggested it may not have belonged to him. The terrain itself became a form of evidence. Drone photography conducted by state rangers revealed depressions in the soil near a creek bed approximately 1 mile from the access road. Investigators compared these depressions to the dimensions of Ethan's boots, but the patterns were degraded by weather and inconclusive. Soil samples revealed traces of hydrocarbons, possibly from a vehicle leak. Toxicology entered unexpectedly. In late February, a hunter walking through the southern section of Wayne Forest discovered a deer carcass dumped near a logging trail. The animal had been field-dressed improperly with stomach contents discarded close by. Testing of the contents revealed faint traces of antifreeze, a substance fatal to wildlife but more commonly associated with intentional poisoning. The find did not directly link to Ethan, yet investigators logged it as potentially significant an environment tainted by human interference. Meanwhile, digital evidence gave investigators new angles. Ethan's cell tower record had ended abruptly at 9:47 a.m. on November 12th, but a deeper data pull revealed an outgoing signal attempt at 10:02 a.m. The call never connected, yet the attempt registered. Analysts traced the ping not to the forest tower but to a relay farther south, suggesting the phone had moved beyond the original search zone. Whether carried by Ethan or by another hand remained unknown. Forensic specialists also examined Ethan's rifle still missing. Ballistic registries showed no matching weapon recovered in the state during the months following his disappearance. The lack of recovery itself became suspicious. Most hunters reported lost rifles quickly due to serial tracking. The absence implied deliberate concealment. In March, investigators ran luminol tests on Ethan's garage floor. The chemical revealed faint patterns consistent with a liquid cleanup extending from the truck's usual parking spot toward the side entrance. Though degraded and impossible to confirm as blood, the irregular streaks were documented. Marissa explained the marks as old spills, dismissing them as residue from motor oil. Analysts could neither confirm nor refute her claim. By spring, the investigation carried a dual character evidence from the woods pointing toward disappearance and evidence from the home hinting at domestic fracture. Detectives balanced these threads cautiously. Without a body, every stain, every object, every silence became amplified. On April 17th, the Bureau's final interim report listed the lighter. Without Ethan's prints, the soil hydrocarbons near the creek, the anomalous phone ping, the garage luminol streaks. Each entry sat in its own box, each suggesting something more, none proving it. The forensic trail was assembling, but it was a skeleton without flesh. The shift into financial and digital records began with a subpoena served quietly to Huntington National Bank. Ethan Keller maintained both a personal checking account and a modest savings account tied to the mortgage on his house. Analysts combed through his transactions from July to November 2017. They found nothing irregular in the months before his disappearance: small purchases at the hardware store, routine deposits from his security job, gas stations, grocery receipts. Then came the week before November 12th. On November 6th, Ethan withdrew $2,500 in cash. For a man who typically kept his account balanced within a few $100s, it was extraordinary. Marissa told detectives she was unaware of the withdrawal. Neighbors later confirmed they had seen Ethan carrying a thick envelope when he stopped by to return borrowed tools. What he did with the money was unclear. It was never redeposited. Further anomalies surfaced in the couple's shared credit card statements. Beginning in early October, there were charges from a motel in Newark, Ohio, recurring twice weekly. Marissa denied any knowledge of these visits. Detectives questioned whether Ethan had been meeting someone or whether Marissa herself had used the card. The front desk staff could not recall details, but one clerk remembered a woman checking in alone, signing the name M. Keller. Phone logs expanded the picture. Ethan's call history contained a cluster of late-night numbers traced to disposable prepaid phones. The calls lasted minutes at a time with no associated names. Analysts cross-referenced tower data. Several of these calls originated not from Wayne County, but from Fairfield County, nearly an hour away. The timing coincided with evenings when Ethan told friends he was working overtime. Investigators also recovered text messages from Ethan's backup phone, a cheaper model he sometimes carried for work. In one thread, dated November 9th, a message read, "I'll bring what I promised. Meet Southside by Tuesday." The recipient was a prepaid number already deactivated. Detectives flagged the exchange, speculating whether it referred to the unexplained cash withdrawal. Financial records also revealed Marissa's hidden strain. In September 2017, she applied for a short-term personal loan under her maiden name, Securingu, $8,000 at high interest. She made only one payment before Ethan vanished. When questioned, she described the loan as a temporary mistake taken to cover home repairs. Yet contractors in the area confirmed no work had been ordered. The insurance file proved more telling. In July, Ethan increased his life insurance policy from $50,000, tone $150,000. The beneficiary remained Marissa. His co-worker later testified Ethan mentioned the change casually, saying, "Asterisk. If anything happens in the woods, at least she won't worry about the house." To prosecutors, this detail would later become pivotal. By mid-2018, the investigative ledger contained its financial spine, a sudden $2,500 withdrawal motel charges linked to the family name text messages to burner phones and an expanded life insurance policy. Each entry by itself was circumstantial. Together they painted a man entangled in transactions and secrets on the eve of his disappearance. For investigators, the case was no longer about a hunter lost in the woods. It was about money moving in shadows, names used in quiet motel registers, and the invisible trail left behind when phones and bank cards are forced to speak. Hidden connections began surfacing slowly, like faint fingerprints appearing under chemical light. Detectives first traced the motel stays in Newark. Clerks offered little but security footage, grainy and time-stamped, showed a woman entering room 214 on October 18, 2017. She wore a hood and kept her head down, but investigators noted her height and build matched Marissa Keller. When confronted with still frames, she dismissed them asterisk, "That could be anyone." The denial left detectives unsettled. Interviews with Ethan's co-workers revealed another thread. A security guard named Daniel Ricks recalled Ethan stepping away during night shifts to make hushed calls. Once, when Ethan returned, he muttered asterisk, "She won't wait forever." Daniel thought it referred to marital stress, but in hindsight it carried another weight. Phone records filled in more gaps. A prepaid number, active only between August and November 2017, exchanged dozens of texts with Ethan's device. Investigators tracked the prepaid SIM's activation to a convenience store in Gloucester, Ohio. Store surveillance showed a man later identified as Curtis Hodge, a 39-year-old with prior convictions for burglary and trafficking stolen goods. Hodge's name was already known to narcotics officers. The discovery led detectives to an overlooked witness. A hunter in Perry County, reviewing his trail camera footage from November 13, 2017, noticed a pickup passing along a dirt road at 5:22 a.m. The image showed two figures in the cab, one at the wheel, another slumped against the passenger window. The truck's make matched Ethan's. The timestamp was less than a day after he was last seen alive. Further inquiry uncovered financial overlap. Bank subpoenas revealed a deposit over $2,400 into an account controlled by Hodge's girlfriend on November 7th. The amount mirrored Ethan's unexplained cash withdrawal. Detectives theorized Ethan may have paid Hodge for something, possibly weapons, possibly silence. Marissa's connections tightened the web. Her phone contained a deleted contact saved under the initials C. Forensic recovery restored several texts. "He'll have it soon, asterisk and asterisk. Tuesday works bring the truck." The timing aligned with Ethan's final days. Investigators also explored church records. Marissa occasionally volunteered at a food pantry. Attendance logs showed she missed several Wednesdays in October nights when motel charges appeared. One volunteer later remarked, "Marissa seemed distracted in those months, often checking her phone, slipping outside for private calls." Detectives pieced these fragments together into a map. At its center stood Ethan, carrying debts, secrets, and new insurance coverage. Radiating outward was Marissa tethered to hidden motel meetings and coded texts. Orbiting them was Curtis Hodge, a career criminal suddenly flush with cash. The connections remained circumstantial, yet their convergence pulled the investigation away from theories of accident. The forest had concealed Ethan's disappearance, but the paper trail and digital echoes suggested design. Someone had walked beside him into that November morning and walked out again with more than just a truck. The turning point arrived not through dramatic confession, but through persistence with small details. In late 2022, a cold case analyst re-examined Ethan's truck. The original forensics had catalogued blood in the cab, but newer luminol testing revealed additional spatter beneath the passenger seat. The pattern suggested blunt force impact inside the vehicle, contradicting the idea of a voluntary departure. Attention then returned to the trail camera photograph. Forensic imaging specialists enhanced the frame-adjusting contrast until the face of the passenger became faintly visible. Though blurry, the shape of the jawline and hairline aligned with Ethan. He appeared unconscious, his head tilted unnaturally against the glass. The driver, though obscured, wore a hooded jacket consistent with one later recovered from Curtis Hodge's residence during a parole search. Investigators obtained phone tower records. On November 12th, Ethan's device pinged off a rural tower at 4:18 a.m., then went silent. Within the next 20 minutes, Marissa's prepaid contact number exchanged 2 short calls with Hodge's phone. Neither lasted more than 30 seconds, yet both were placed from the same coverage zone as the forest preserve. The clinching detail came from bank data. The insurance payout on Ethan's policy, filed as presumed death, had been processed to a joint account controlled by Marissa. Subpoenas revealed that within 2 weeks, $9,800 in cash withdrawals were made at ATMs near Hodge's neighborhood. Surveillance showed Marissa withdrawing once hood drawn low, and Hodge's girlfriend withdrawing on 3 other occasions. Detectives assembled the timeline with clinical precision. November 11th, Ethan visited the sporting goods store buying ammunition. November 12th. Early morning, he drove toward the preserve. Around dawn, trail camera captured the truck with 2 figures. By 4:20 a.m., his phone fell silent. By 5 a.m., Marissa and Hodge exchanged brief calls. 2 days later, Ethan failed to return. His disappearance was reported by co-workers, not by his wife. Years passed before the truck surfaced submerged in Slate Creek. Inside, skeletal remains confirmed as Hodges lay in the driver's seat. Ethan was absent, but blood patterns in the cab suggested he had been attacked before the truck entered water. The paradox was chilling. The man tied to his disappearance had ended in the very vehicle that once belonged to Ethan. For prosecutors, the timeline was finally coherent. Ethan's debts and insurance policy created motive. Marissa's affair and coded communications provided link. Hodge's sudden influx of cash and eventual death inside the truck tied the conspiracy together. What had once been a missing person file now carried the weight of homicide. The evidence could not resurrect Ethan, but it transformed silence into narrative. The story was no longer of a man who vanished in the woods. It was of a man led there under pretense, struck down and erased until the water receded and the connections surfaced. On the morning of February 3, 2023, detectives from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation executed simultaneous warrants. At 6:15 a.m., unmarked vehicles converged on Marissa Cole's small rental home. Another team moved on a duplex linked to Curtis Hodges' girlfriend. The operation unfolded quietly, neighbors later recalling only the flash of vests and the sight of Marissa led out in handcuffs, her face pale against the gray dawn. At headquarters, the interrogation began under fluorescent light. Marissa sat at a metal table, wrists free, but posture stiff, while Detective Ramirez opened a manila folder stacked with photographs. The first was of Ethan's wedding band, retrieved from a shallow groove in the truck's center console. The second showed the enhanced trail camera, still Ethan's slumped eyes half shut. Marissa glanced once, then looked away. "You told officers you last saw Ethan the evening of November 11th, Ramirez said. Yet your phone placed you within the Slate Creek zone at 4:22 a.m. Who were you calling?" Marissa's voice was soft, rehearsed. "I couldn't sleep. I called a friend." Curtis Hodge Ramirez pressed. Silence stretched. Marissa shook her head, but her jaw tightened. Detectives shifted tactics. They presented the ATM stills. One frame captured her silhouette under a hood, withdrawing cash from the joint account days after Ethan's presumed death. Another showed Hodges' girlfriend at a separate terminal. The timestamps were aligned to withdrawals totaling nearly $10,000. "Explain these," said Ramirez. Marissa exhaled sharply, claiming she withdrew money for bills. But when asked about Hodges' girlfriend appearing on camera, she had no response. The denials began to fray. At the same time, another team questioned Hodges' girlfriend Lisa. Faced with potential charges of accessory to fraud, she cracked quickly. She admitted that Hodge boasted of a payday tied to Ethan's disappearance. He had told her, "The truck is ours, the rest is easy." She confessed she had been instructed to withdraw insurance cash in small amounts to avoid suspicion. Back in Marissa's interview room, detectives delivered the statement. For the first time, her composure broke. Her hands trembled, her words faltered. Still, she did not confess outright. "Curtis made his own choices," she muttered. "I never told him to hurt Ethan." But prosecutors needed no direct confession. The cumulative evidence financial digital forensic was enough. That afternoon, Marissa Cole was formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder insurance fraud and obstruction of justice. Curtis Hodges' fate was sealed by death inside the truck, yet investigators framed him posthumously as the physical perpetrator. Marissa, they alleged, had been the orchestrator, the beneficiary, the one who stood to gain from Ethan's absence. As Marissa was escorted to county jail, reporters gathered outside, cameras flashing. "Did you kill your husband?" someone shouted. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, lips pressed thin. The arrest marked the collapse of the story she had lived with for nearly 5 years. The illusion of a husband gone hunting, the image of a grieving widow, the silence of unanswered questions, each shattered by a timeline reconstructed with relentless precision. The trial of State of Ohio versus Marissa Cole began on October 9, 2023, in Franklin County Court. By then, nearly a year had passed since Ethan's truck had been lifted from the quarry, and the case had drawn regional attention. Journalists filled the backbenches, sketch artists sharpened pencils, and members of Ethan's family sat stiff and silent in the front row. Marissa entered the courtroom in a pale blazer chosen by her defense. Her hair was pulled back, her expression carefully neutral. Some observers whispered that she looked more like an office clerk than a woman accused of orchestrating her husband's murder. The transformation was deliberate. Her attorneys wanted jurors to see a restrained figure, not the widow who had once danced in a local bar with Curtis Hodge. Opening statements set the tone. Assistant Prosecutor Linda Carver rose first, her voice steady. This case, she told the jury, is about greed disguised as grief. It is about a woman who saw her husband not as a partner, but as an obstacle. And when Ethan Cole vanished, she became the only person who benefited. She pointed toward the evidence table where binders of phone logs, bank statements, and forensic reports waited to be unsealed. The defense countered with a different narrative. Attorney Michael Strand argued that Marissa had been trapped in a storm of assumptions. Ethan Cole's life ended in tragedy, but tragedy does not equal guilt, he said. There is no fingerprint, no eyewitness, no direct proof tying Marissa to a fatal act. What the state presents as a conspiracy is nothing more than a collection of coincidences, rumors, and grief. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically. Detectives testified, first walking jurors through the discovery of Ethan's truck and the two bodies inside. Photographs of the corroded vehicle projected on a large screen made some jurors flinch. Forensic pathologist Dr. Leah Grant described Ethan's skeletal remains, pointing out the linear fractures consistent with blunt trauma to the back of the skull. These injuries are not the result of a fall, she testified. They are deliberate blows. The trail camera footage followed. Grainy but unmistakable, it showed Ethan slumped beside his truck, Curtis Hodge leaning in through the open door. Jurors leaned forward as the still image of Ethan's half-lidded face filled the monitor. The timestamp matched the final calls from Marissa's phone. Then came the financial trail. Bank analysts outlined transfers from Ethan's accounts to Marissa's control within days of his disappearance. ATM surveillance was shown Marissa under a hood Hodge's girlfriend, withdrawing cash. Prosecutors highlighted the joint pattern, the synchronized withdrawals, and the timing aligned to Ethan's death. Perhaps most damaging was the testimony of Lisa Hodge's girlfriend. Her voice wavered, but her words cut through the courtroom. Curtis said Marissa promised they'd be set for life once Ethan was gone. He said the truck was proof. The defense tried to discredit her as a self-serving witness, but jurors took notes as she recounted late-night conversations and threats. When Marissa took the stand in her own defense, the courtroom tightened. She spoke softly of Ethan calling him a good man who loved the woods. She insisted she had nothing to do with his death, that Curtis had manipulated her. "I never wanted Ethan harmed," she said, tears streaking her cheeks. But under cross-examination, the mask slipped. Asked why she had lied about her whereabouts the morning of November 12th, she hesitated. Pressed about the ATM footage, she offered halting explanations that contradicted earlier statements. Prosecutor Carver ended with a single question. "Mrs. Cole, if you truly had no role in Ethan's disappearance, why did every financial transaction, every phone call, every secret withdrawal lead back to you?" Marissa had no answer. Closing arguments sealed the divide. The prosecution framed the case as one of motive, method, and manipulation, emphasizing that while Curtis Hodge swung the weapon, Marissa Cole built the plan. The defense clung to reasonable doubt, urging jurors not to convict on circumstantial evidence alone. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. At 4:18 p.m. on October 26, 2023, the foreman rose and delivered the verdict guilty on charges of conspiracy to commit murder insurance fraud and obstruction of justice. Marissa Cole closed her eyes as the words were read. Behind her, Ethan's sister whispered, "Finally." Sentencing was scheduled for November 14, 2023. That morning, the courthouse was lined with reporters bracing against the cold wind. The public fascination with the Cole case had only deepened after the guilty verdict. A hunter vanished. A truck reappeared years later with two bodies, a wife at the center of it all. It was a narrative too dark and cinematic to fade quickly. Inside, the gallery filled with family members from both sides. Ethan's mother clutched a framed photograph of her son in hunting gear, the same one once displayed at his memorial service. Marissa's parents sat further back, staring at the floor, their daughter shackled at the wrists as deputies led her into the room. Judge Deborah Whitley presided. Her reputation for stern sentences preceded her, and silence fell as she entered. Assistant Prosecutor Carver read a victim impact statement from Ethan's sister. "We spent years searching the woods, holding vigils, hoping for his return. Instead, we found a truck buried in water and a conspiracy that betrayed every bond of trust. Ethan deserved better. He deserved life." When given the chance to speak, Marissa rose slowly. Her voice quivered. "I never wanted Ethan gone," she said. "I lost myself. I made mistakes. But I am not a murderer." The words landed flat. Even her defense attorney avoided her eyes. Judge Whitley delivered the sentence with measured calm. "The evidence shows not only conspiracy, but cruelty. You watched a man trust you, and you turned that trust into currency. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The gavel struck once. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Ethan's family wept openly, clinging to one another. Marissa sagged in her chair, lips trembling as deputies moved to escort her away. For her, the fight ended not with the freedom she once imagined, but with the sound of chains tightening. In the months that followed, the story of Ethan Cole's disappearance and discovery left a permanent mark on the Ohio community. Local news revisited the case each anniversary, replaying interviews with detectives and forensic experts. Documentarians scouted the quarry where the truck had rested. True crime podcasts retold the story as a parable of greed and betrayal. For Ethan's family, closure was more fragile. His remains were buried in a small cemetery north of town beneath a headstone etched with the words, "A hunter who never came home." Each November, relatives gathered with lanterns at dusk, leaving arrows of pine branches across his grave. The truck itself, once pulled from the quarry, was dismantled and stored in evidence lockers. Its rusted metal still carried streaks of algae, faint reminders of years underwater. To detectives, it was less a vehicle than a tomb, a container of secrets now laid bare. As for Marissa Cole, prison became her new reality. Inmates whispered her nickname, the Quarry Widow, mocking the fortune she had hoped to gain. She walked the yard in state-issue gray shoulders, hunched, avoiding eyes that burned with curiosity and disdain. In the end, the case was not just about a missing man. It was about how betrayal corrodes the ordinary, how silence can bury truth, and how greed leaves scars deeper than waterlogged steel. Ethan Cole's story closed not in the woods where he last walked, but in the cold corridors of a courthouse where love money and murder collided.